Hello, everyone. Welcome to the YA Sci-Fi Fantasy Debut Panel. I'm really excited that we have been able to do multiple iterations of this as a series. More to come on that. But anyway, thank you so much to all the authors and everyone for joining us. I just wanted to say a little bit about me and the sort of housekeeping, and then I'll help the authors introduce themselves, and then we'll go into chatting. If you have any questions, by the way, throughout the chat, or even now if you want, you can drop them in the chat and I will try to go back to them throughout, and I'll periodically remind you in case you don't have any at the moment. Just so everyone is also on the same page, here we are trying to facilitate a safe space, and so we do not tolerate any harassment of any kind in our panel spaces. Also, who I am. My name's Lily. I'm the book blogger person behind Utopia State of Mind, and I'm now moderating this panel, which has been an utter joy to organize. So I'll have the authors introduce themselves, and then we'll go into the questions that I had, and we'll start off with Jen.
Hi, first of all, thank you so much for having me and all of us. I'm a big fan of some of these other authors, so it's cool to meet you. My novel is called If Tomorrow Doesn't Come. It's out May 9th from Bloomsbury and May 11th from Penguin UK. It is about a college freshman who's suffering from depression to the point of having suicidal ideation. But on the day when she plans to end her life, she finds out an asteroid is coming. They may or may not have 9 days to live, and so it's her really rediscovering how to live again. She returns home and has a romance with her best friend and reconnects with her family.
Jean, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sorry, I had a technical difficulty. Yes, my book is Waking Fire. It came out January 10th. It's about a young girl whose village is taken over by a warlord and his mistress, and she has these scary, crazy monsters that run around and destroy things. And Naira, the main character, decides that she's gonna start a resistance and she's gonna fight back and take back her village because her main goal is to protect her family. So it came out January 10th and it's in bookstores now.
Hi, everyone. Lily, thank you so much for having me, and it's such a pleasure to be here with so many amazing authors. I'm Zeba Chanaz, and my book, there it is Midnight Strikes. It just came out this past Tuesday from Delacorte Press. So this is a time loop fantasy. It's about a 17-year-old girl named Anais, who's kind of dragged to this grand royal ball in the capital. She very much does not want to be there. She doesn't want to be at court with people who look down on her and her people. And then at midnight, there's a mysterious attack. Explosions are going off all around the ballroom, and everyone dies, including Anais. This is not a spoiler. But then she wakes up earlier that same day, is the only person who remembers what happened and the only one who believes that it's going to happen again. And then as it keeps happening, she kind of realizes that her only way through a pretty brutal time loop is to stop the attack before it happens. So I like to pitch it as Cinderella meets Edge of Tomorrow, or any time loop, Groundhog Day, Russian Doll, Palm Springs, take your pick. But yeah, and it just came out this week, so it's very exciting to be here.
I'm Jenna, and this is my book, Made of Stars. It comes out in 10 days on March 28th. So we're getting down to the wire with that one. It's about two teenage outlaws. I should pitch it as Bonnie and Clyde in space. So it's about two teenage outlaws on the run who are committing a bunch of heists to try to save their home planet, and the enemy pilot who is tasked with hunting them down. So lots of crime and betrayal and kissing in stolen spaceships.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tessa Barbosa, and this is my book, The Moonlight Blade. It comes out on Tuesday, so that's March 21st, and it's really soon, and I'm nervous and so excited, and I'm so happy to be here with you. It's a story about a cursed girl who enters a deadly magical competition, even though she has no skills and she has no magic, but she wants to break into the fortress where her mother is being kept in the dungeons. And while she's there, in this competition, she starts to figure out exactly why her mother was arrested and uncovers a conspiracy that goes back through past lives and unraveling why she was cursed in the first place and what she has to do to stop her country from being destroyed again. And that is what the book is about. I sort of pitched it, or I could pitch it as what if the Hunger Games was Southeast Asian? And that's it for me. Thanks.
Yeah, I love the group we got together. It kind of just all happened that release dates were all very similar, springish, beginning of 2023, and I loved like the very different vibes all of these books give. But I had a really fun time making the questions because I felt like even though there are very different like themes and atmospheres, I guess, to all of these different books, there are some really, really core themes that like really resonated with me. But before I go into those questions, I want to start off with kind of a really broad question, which is, do you remember the first science fiction fantasy book you ever read? And if it's not the same as, and what was the most influential? They don't have to necessarily be the same, but I want to know both of these titles.
So for me, the first one I remember having an impact on me was The Giver by Lois Lowry. And I think middle school, I read it. And I think that was one of my first introductions to speculative fiction. And that obviously has an impact. But the one that has stuck with me so long and really solidified my interest was The Martian Chronicles by Ray Bradbury. In particular, there's this one story where there's this little girl who lives on this planet where the sun only comes once a year. And I'm sure everyone's read it by now, but she gets locked in a room on the day that the sun comes, and she's been waiting for it for so long. And it just taught me so much about storytelling and character and expectations, and just like the power of setting something in a world similar to ours where you can understand everything that's happening, but just kind of breaks your heart.
For me, I don't remember the first fantasy book I've read. I've been a reader. It might have been just like comic strips. I've always been a reader, and so I don't remember the first one I read, but I do know the book that I read as a child that made the biggest impression on me, especially as a fantasy writer, and that would be the Chronicles of Narnia series, and not just the main one that everyone knows, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the whole series. What I like about it is the simplicity in the storytelling. The writing is very simple. It doesn't get it's not very verbose. The sentences structure is very simple, but the way he's able to describe the world and you can picture it using such simple language has always stuck with me, and that's something I try to emulate in my own writing.
Also, I've been pondering this and I can't remember the first one, so I'll go with most influential. I think when I was a kid, I loved Cornelia Funke and Garth Nix and Philip Pullman and kind of that era of I guess children's fantasy. But one key formative influence for me was picking up The Amulet of Samarkand by Jonathan Stroud. So if you've already torn through the Lockwood books or the series, please go read those. They're amazing. But in any case, I started reading this book at one time and I came across a character named Arthur Underwood, and then my jaw dropped because as a seventh grader, I was also plotting a book naturally. And there was a character named Arthur Underwood. But in the world of Jonathan Stroud's book, magicians pick their names, and this particular character had picked Arthur Underwood as his name, as like this incredibly cheesy and fantasy-y name. And that kind of blew my mind as a 12-year-old, and I felt really like called out. Like, of course, I thought this was such a cool and amazing and original magician name, and he's using it as a joke in the more sophisticated like magic world. But yeah, so I think that kind of like broke my brain in terms of like, well, I'm still like at this level where I need to be able to make those jokes in world. And then the books themselves are just so voicey and so fun and really bleak, actually. And I look back at them in a way that I now find really appealing. So I think that was a huge influence for me.
For me, some of the first sci-fi that I remember reading were the Animorphs series. I was like a really big Animorphs kid, and they weren't like very big books. So I would literally go to the library and read them in the library because my parents thought they were like too scary for me to take home and read. And like looking back at it now, they were absolutely like terrifying. But I think that that was also a really influential series for me just because it was at its core like about teens fighting like a massive, terrible government, and like they are so outmatched and this government has all of these resources and it's like very scary and their home is just like in danger all the time. But then there's also these like wonderful epic space battles and like friendly aliens. And it was just like a perfect combination of like fun, but then also like actually very dark, serious themes that I think that I have like carried with me when I've just started writing on my own.
I remember the first fantasy novel I ever picked up. I think, I can't remember how old I was, maybe 7 or so. And it was this book called The Singing Stone by O.R. Melling. And it's basically a sort of middle grade version of Outlander, where this girl goes on a trip to Ireland and she gets pulled back in time and she meets this mysterious stranger and discovers that she has magical powers and her ancestors, and how it's all connected to why she's an orphan now in the present time. And, you know, come to think about it, I think it subconsciously sort of affected my writing of The Moonlight Blade, because we have a mysterious stranger, we have like past lives and magic and discovering powers. So it's like, I think it's just stuck with me through all these years. And as for what is probably the most influential, a little bit later on in life is when I actually read these 2 short story collections by Ursula Le Guin called, one of them is a sci-fi collection called The Birthday of the World, and the other one is Tales from Earthsea, so some extra stories about the Earthsea in general. And in the back of these short stories, which are amazing, she goes into exactly what she was thinking and why she wrote these stories. And it kind of just blew my mind that you could use stories to sort of explore like sociology or anthropology or like human nature. And so that just totally changed the way I think about writing.
Yeah, I realized after I wrote this question, I don't even know what my own answer would be. I think that um probably I think that probably it's something like the warrior cats or something like that. I don't know if it's I feel like that's the youngest I can think of, because also Garth Nix was really huge for me as a teen, but like I think I read Warrior Cats before teen. I think that was a little, as if I picked it up as a 15-year-old, I don't know if I would have been as enthused about Warrior Cats as I was when like pre 13, I guess. Um so I want to ask, going back to what I was kind of saying before, I want to ask one of these like broader theme questions, because I felt like when I was reading all of these books before the panel, one of these larger themes I was thinking about is like family. Family in terms of sort of found family, family, friends that become family, you know, these broader definitions of family. And I wanted to know, you know, in all of your books, you have like varying sort of permutations of protecting family, reconciliation, very complex relationships with our family. And so I wanted to know for all of you if you could describe to us your main character's relationship to their family, and like what family sort of as a driving force means to your novel, which is like such a big question. But yeah, that's what I would like to know.
Yeah, so I think family can do so much in terms of characterization. Like, first of all, it's where your character often comes from, or if found family, you know, well, still kind of where they're coming from, at least at the start of the book. It also shows you what expectations are put on the character. And I think the way in which they meet them or don't really causes a lot of tension in most stories. I think for my character, Avery, she is gay. She has come out to her parents and they were like kind of lukewarm about it. And they're Catholic, so they really still believe in hell. And so that's a big source of tension. What I wanted to do with this family in particular is show, you know, I think for a lot of queer kids, sometimes parents are completely accepting, sometimes they reject you completely. But I think more commonly it's somewhere in the middle. There's still a lot of love there. They have a lot of fear around their children's lives and they want them to be happy and not face hardship. And so a lot of that comes out in family dynamics. So for Avery, she's very close with her family, but she also understands that her version of happiness will be really sad and disappointing for them. So really over the course of the novel, it's her reconciling that, and perhaps she's projecting a little bit onto them. And I think she really comes to see her parents as people too, and really eventually realizes their sadnesses as well and their struggles. And that's the first time she feels fully seen by them as well. So I think it shows a lot of where she comes from and what her fears are and what her hesitations are around like really embracing herself for who she is. And then I think in terms of her found family, that's true as well. Like she has a lot of queer people in her life and queer friends, but isn't really fully ready to admit to herself that she's just like them. And it doesn't mean that she's too much of a problem for anyone.
For Naira, her family starts out just her parents and her brother. That's the most important thing in the world to her. But as the story develops, she gets new friends, and they become part of this family that she's working with to protect. And eventually, her whole village becomes the family that she's trying to protect. It's everyone that she knows and cares about, even her enemies in the village, some people that she doesn't get along with. She even cares about protecting them and saving them from this threat that has descended upon them. So family is a really big theme in this book, and it grows from just the four of them to including to friends and to including the whole village and the things that matter the most to the main character.
I think for Annie's the main character in Midnight, she's an introvert. She is a country girl and she loves her family and her home more than anything. But I think sometimes that love is and the pressure that comes with it, particularly where kind of this royal ball is concerned and her carrying her family's hopes for their place in society, for her people, for their safety, security. That pressure is more than she like wants, and she's kind of had to accept it. She doesn't really question it at the start. She knows what her duty is to her family, which is namely to strike a very advantageous match at this ball and kind of be able to catapult her family and her people to kind of higher status and greater security and whatnot. And she's fully willing to do that, even at the cost of her happiness. But then she gets caught in this time loop, and family becomes a lot more of a problem than it was consciously for her. So on the one hand, there's the fact that no one believes her when she says this is going to happen. We need to get out of here. Her parents certainly don't. They're still trying to like set her up with guys at the ball while she's trying to like escape and like save their lives. So there's that. So there's a little bit of comedy in there, at least for me. But I think that the bigger question for her that she learns that she has to face is what am I really doing here? Who am I without my parents' pressures or kind of all of the expectations that have come with me being here? And what do I do next? So Annie's kind of becomes untethered in a way when she's stuck in time to all the ties that are linking her to what her life was, including her parents. And she has to figure out who she is without it and what she wants for her own future.
I also had fun working with the plot in Made of Stars because I think that the three main characters have a very tense relationship with their family and the place that they're from specifically. There's like a lot of tension and baggage about their hometowns and their home cities, and then by default, the people who live there. So there's a big theme of the three of them kind of wanting to get out of their, separate towns and their separate planets and kind of do something more with their lives, which kind of by default distances them from their family. But when it gets down to it and their families are in danger, the main characters are going to protect the people that they love no matter what. And that was important to me too, because the characters are not doing the great things. A lot of the times, like they're criminals, they're killing people, but it was important for me to for the reader to understand like why they are doing the things that they are doing and like the different relationships between the different characters, whether it be their family that they had a tense relationship with at the beginning, but like at the end of the day are going to protect no matter what, or whether it be this like little found family that they found in, you know, their little criminal heist cohort. But yeah, those relationships were important for me to present on page, just because I think that there's so much that's happening around them that if we don't understand like where they're coming from and why they are doing it, then it's just kind of harder to follow.
So my book kind of draws heavily on Filipino culture, and one of the biggest or most important things in our culture is family. So it felt like it wouldn't be real if family wasn't involved in some way or another. And Nara, who's the main character, her older sister is her best friend, and her mother, she sort of has a complicated relationship with her because she's trying to protect Nara, but that means that she's also lying to her about a lot of things. And so while she loves her mother, she's also angry at her for, you know, keeping things from her, the truth. And in the end, this book is sort of has like multiple sort of explorations of what it means to be a mother or a daughter, or mother and daughter relationships. And it's not a coincidence that the supreme being in this world is sort of like a goddess, and her relationship with the people of the country as well.
I have some questions that I want to ask to pair some books together, and to go a little bit more in depth into some of into the books. So I want to start off with Made of Stars and If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, because you are two sci-fi books here. And I want to chat about, if you could both talk about what drew you to the sci-fi genre and the inspiration for the world or like sci-fi twists in your story, you know, because If Tomorrow Doesn't Come is like, it's our world. So it's not necessarily like a world from scratch. So for, you know, for If Tomorrow Doesn't Come, like the sci-fi elements in your story. I don't know who wants to start. Jenna, do you want to start?
Sure, I will. I know that I talked a little bit about like how much I loved Animorphs as a child, and just like the big epic space battles that I think are so much fun. And I think when I never like set out to be like, I'm going to write a sci-fi or I'm going to write a space opera. Just when I was thinking about things that were interesting to me, and I was thinking about the Bonnie and Clyde story, and I was like, oh, I would love to do more research into that. Out of the blue, I was like, but what if it was in space? And it just kind of like fit with the drama of what was happening and like the high stakes vibe of what I wanted to go for. And I don't think that I would have been able to like do a heist story or like tell this story in any other format that wasn't in space and like this epic galaxy sweeping adventure type of way. It just kind of worked together in that way. And I just like think that space is cool. I feel like it adds like an extra element of like danger to whatever you are doing. Because if you are, you know, like in space and suddenly like your spaceship explodes, you are now in like a place where there is no air and you cannot breathe. And that's like an extra level of like danger that's happening to your characters. So I think there's like there can be higher stakes in that way. And it just kind of fit the story that I was trying to tell. And then also I got to combine obviously all of the things that I loved as a child with these like big epic space battles. So it really worked out.
Well, first of all, I can't wait to read that. And I can in a few weeks. Second of all, so for my book, it's about depression and other things, of course. But I think depression can be really hard to write about in contemporary because it's really hard to sit with as a writer or as a reader for an entire book. And it's also like a really flat experience most of the time, right? It's just like this really monotone emotional state. And feelings can be very muted. And so I think setting it in a speculative setting kind of adds some texture to that. It adds some movement, and it really forces everybody to really like deal with the things that they're burying immediately. And I think when I first started writing it too, it's you're exactly right. It is our world. But I think when I was writing the book at first and was in the middle of one of the more bigger episodes of depression in my life, I was in this world, but I didn't really feel like I was in the same world as everybody else. I felt like very alone, and also that everybody else was having a very different experience than I was. And was living in a very different reality. Like for me, it really did feel like the world was ending kind of all the time. And I also was just really, this was way pre-COVID. I started writing it in 2012, but which, by the way, end of the world was like a hot topic at the time. But when I started writing it, I was like really confused by how people didn't realize like how short our lives were, and was just watching people make choices that didn't make sense to me in that context. And so one of the important things about this book is that everybody all of a sudden is living in that same experience and that same reality, and everybody feels like the world is ending. So her depression doesn't become irrelevant, but it does become this more shared experience. And they're kind of all living in the same world for the first time once they find out that the asteroid's hitting.
Yeah, I love a good countdown. And I feel like an asteroid coming to destroy the Earth is like the ultimate countdown, especially, well, at least for Earth people, right? I want to also talk about rebellion. I felt like rebellion, whether it's like, well, I think what I'm drawn to a lot this year, at least, is this idea of rebellion being like personal rebellion and also organized rebellion, because I think there is a difference between like larger scale organizational rebellions like against governments, but also personal rebellions about sort of expectations that people have for you that you don't want to meet, or like that you can't meet. And I think that both of those are really universal. And I wanted to talk about how rebellion in both of those kind of senses is a part of Waking Fire and Midnight Strikes. So I wanted to know, for both of you, how do you balance a character's stakes versus the plot of the world, right? So like their own ambitions and sort of conflicts versus also like these big level conflicts. I don't know who wants to start. Ziba, do you want to start?
Sorry, the mute button did not cooperate with me and Zeba. But anyway, on the rebellion question, I thought this was really interesting in that on the surface level, this is like the plot question. Maybe a little bit of a spoiler, but not really. But the explosions that are happening at midnight is part of a revolution in the making that kind of ends when Anais dies and comes back. But so that's constantly what's happening, right? So that's the plot question, but it's also the underlying character question for Anais as well. And I think as she's kind of figuring out what's going on and what's leading to this rebellion and this revolution, and figuring out what else is happening at court, she slowly begins to realize that what she does is going to shape the future of the kingdom. If she ever gets out of the loop, right? If the government is under attack, and if she stops the rebellion and saves people's lives, then that means the current government continues. And she also debates for a good while, like, maybe I just let this revolution happen, or maybe I like temper it in some way. But whatever she chooses to do, if she doesn't die in the morning, then that means that is what the people of Ivaria, the kingdom, are going to be living under. And I think that intertwines the personal stakes with the kind of large scale rebellion, government, fate of the kingdom stakes in a really literal way, in a way that she has to struggle with, especially as she kind of starts realizing or getting close to what she decides is best, in terms of you can kind of eventually decide the fate of the kingdom in some way or other. But then what happens when that's also your fate? And what happens when you are in that future and you can't rewind time and can't undo the choices you made to see what else could have happened? So I think those are the kind of big questions for her. And then in terms of balancing those stakes, I think for me it took a while to get right, because when I was initially drafting this book, I was much more concerned, or like conscious of like getting the plot right, getting the execution right, putting the mystery together, getting all the puzzle pieces seated such that we can follow them, and kind of putting the action up front. And Anais's story of kind of learning who she is, what she wants, what she's fighting for, was always there, but it didn't really come through as much on the page. And it took me a while, or not a while, but like a draft or so, to realize that that needs to be the focus of the book. Otherwise, it's just going to be like a fun action romp, which is lovely, and I would enjoy a lot, but not something that I felt would have any weight for me if it didn't like start with character stakes first before kind of getting entangled in the world. But yeah, so that's what that journey was like. And I'm really glad with how it turned out. And ideally kind of putting eyes and focus in the world sort of as part of it, but not overshadowing her.
For Waking Fire, Naira is a character who has a strong sense of justice, and that matters a lot to her, making things right. But it also makes it that she sees the world in black and white a lot, and there's no nuance, there's no middle ground for her. You're either on the good side or you're on the bad side. And so that's something that she has to struggle with as she's learns more about what's going on in her village, this person that's come in and taken over, and how to deal with that person. And so the plot of the story, the main plot is, this taking our village back, which involves a big resistance of numerous people all coming together to fight back. But then there's also the internal struggles that she has. She, like I said, she sees the world in black and white. She wants to go out and just deal with everything by using her fists. She has these impulse control issues that she deals with. She has just anger issues and stuff. And so she has these little rebellions inside of her where she wants to be this big explosive person, but everyone's telling her, no, no, you need to calm down, you need to be rational, you need to think about this that way. So it's hard for her, but the way it worked for me was tying in the struggle that she's dealing with the larger plot. So as she is learning more about this character that's taken over her village, as she's learning more about the resistance that's trying to stop the takeover, she is learning more about herself and how to deal with um these actions of hers that causes problems for her in the long run or causes problems for her family. And she's learning how to see the world in a more nuanced way, and not just this is good, this is bad, and I'm on the good side, so everything I do must be good. She has to learn, no, beating up everyone is not always a good thing. And so, and you may want to go in and beat up the main villain and take down the big bad guy, but is that the best way to do it? So like it all had to tie together for me. Her struggle had to match the struggle of the other people in the village and the main story.
And then the final book pairing that I have for the Moonlight Blade and Midnight Strikes, I felt like one of the things that was the first like really thing that resonated with me about both of your main characters is like this feeling of being out of place. And so I wanted to know for you both, what were the first like inspiration or the seeds for your main characters, and how did their story or like story arc, story journey basically develop throughout the story? I realized, sorry, develop through drafting. I was like, develop through the story. That's super spoilery. No, develop through drafting. um, I don't know who wants to start. Tessa, do you want to start?
Sure, I can go first. And this book, I stopped counting drafts after a while, but it was maybe 13 drafts or so. And the thing is that I had such a hard time finding the character's voice and also her motivation. Like, she's kind of like an introverted character, and she doesn't like parties, she doesn't like a lot of people. So why would she join a competition to like become ruler of her country in the first place? And it wasn't actually until the very, very last draft, back in November, so that was like, I don't know, that it finally shifted to be like, what makes the most sense is that she's not doing this because she wants to rule a country, but because she wants to save her mother. And that's because, like, it's a story about mothers and daughters and their relationships. And so it's finally clicked into place. And that's probably about it.
I think some of this I answered in the previous question, just in terms of like balancing the plot arc with the character arc, but similar to what Tessa was talking about in terms of what is this introvert doing at this giant event. I think for me the hardest part of drafting was getting the beginning right, and getting not just Anais's voice, but calibrating what attitude she has coming into the ball before the loops get started. What does she, what does she feel about this court? What does she feel about um, her place in this world? What does she want? And what is the reader going to learn through each interaction she has in and out of the loop? So a lot of this was kind of balancing how she feels, not just about kind of what's happening politically, or learning not just what is happening politically at court, because there's also a lot of world building that kind of has to come in a very at times claustrophobic space, but also what Anais feels about it. And I think initially she was kind of more just like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, I don't want to be here, for like a chapter. And then kind of as you uncover, well, if the story is going to be about what she finds at the end of her loop, if she ever gets out of it, or decides who she really is, then you have to know where she's starting from. And so setting those pieces together, figuring out how best to approach that, and kind of being able to nuance her level of knowledge and feelings about what's going on in her country and what she wants for herself at the start, um, was one of the things that I think helped solidify that arc, such that you could actually trace it, even if like the structure of the book is kind of atypical, but like character wise, I think it's a pretty traditional YA in that it's a coming of age. It's a Bildungsroman for the main character.
Yeah, I think that you did such a great job of, like, I feel like with time loops it can be kind of hard to like give more information because like you're stuck in the same loop. But I felt like you did such a great job of like bringing in these other things. Like, you're always wondering like what side characters are thinking in the scene or whatever. And I felt like it was really great example of all these people with that, throughout, that you kind of just pass by and you never think about. And then like when you have to live it over and over and over again, you're kind of like, did I really see everything I needed to see? Like,
exactly. I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, I'm also like on a time loop binge right now. Like I will read at this point, if anything has a time loop in it, like I will just drop everything and read it. Um, we have one question so far. Also, by the way, I forgot to mention, but if you have any questions, again, please drop them in the chat. I want to ask the one question that we have so far first before I get back to all my other questions. It is, if there are lessons writing sci-fi fantasy / your debuts that you will carry into future projects. I don't know who wants to start, because like this is not one that we prepared for in advance.
I guess I could start. First of all, hi, Caroline. Thank you for being here. So yeah, as we've mentioned, mine's a little bit more speculative fiction, so very grounded in our world. But I thought my second book that I'm currently working on was going to be really set in the future and even more sci-fi. And I don't know, my editor was kind of like, dial it back, please. So it's actually more contemporary than I thought it was going to be. And I'm really happy with it. But I think the negotiation in my head then was like every single thing that I write, no matter how contemporary it is, like I want it to feel like a slightly more extreme version of our world. For example, like this book's dealing with climate change. And so it's very real, and I might set it like 10 years in the future. And I still get to play with that a little bit. But I think for me, just having that parallel of like having it set in our world, and yet it's just like a very extreme version, you can do a lot to amplify things and like emphasize things and really turn up the volume on the emotions of the characters, on things that we are currently dealing with, but just elevating them in fiction.
I'll jump in. One of the things I learned as I was writing and after I got with my publisher and everything and found my editor, is that not to be afraid to put everything on the page. I thought that oh, if I put this in there, people are going to think it's too dark and they're not going to want to read it, or if I do this or that. But then I like just stop holding myself back and put, like, I call it my kitchen sink book, because I put every idea I had into this book. And I just put it out there, and luckily it found a home, and now it's out on the shelves. But I learned to stop holding myself back and just put everything that I wanted to do with this story I did, and I was really proud of the way it turned out. So I think if there is anyone else out there who is a writer, or just kind of any creative project that you're working on, don't hold back. Don't limit yourself.
I can go real quick. I think for me, this has been a very interesting journey in that I have always had trouble. I have no problem starting projects. I can't finish them for my life for the most part. So I think part of this comes down to like feeling like I know where I'm going. So for Midnight, I had to have a very clear roadmap of what is happening when and what the end is building to. So I found that really helpful in a way that outlining really hadn't been in the past for me. But I think like fantasy wise, it's for me, it really comes down to the world and wanting to live there, and being confident in my ability to pull off what I see. Um, I think I've had trouble in other projects um, before I got an agent or anything, and just trying to like get to the end point and believing that I could pull off particularly a lot of the history inspired fantasies that I was writing. And I think there's just a lot of pressure, and for me, particularly when it came to like writing South Asian inspired fantasy, there was a lot of pressure of like not feeling I can live up to a thing that matters to me in a weird way. And I think beginning to let go of that pressure, being able to that I inflicted completely on myself, and kind of really embracing the vision I have, and not fighting, well, maybe fighting, but fighting through a draft, particularly when it's not going well. I think that perseverance has been hard won, and I hope that I've internalized that lesson, and hope that writers who are also struggling with finishing projects, or kind of believing that they have a voice, or that their idea is worth their time. I hope that's something that is helpful in any way.
I think for me, I don't know if this is specifically related to the genre, but for debuts in general, I mean, like Made of Stars was my debut, and it was also like the first book that I was like, I'm just going to write whatever I want, like for myself type of thing. And so I obviously like really cared about it. I worked on it for a really long time. And I think that's like really great. And that's an element that you should continue to like bring over into every book you write. Like you should want to write it, and you should care about it, and it should like be fun for you. But I do think that like publishing is also like a business. So there are like some things that make like writing or make debuting not very fun, just like on the business side of things. And I think as I move forward into like different projects, and like the second book that I'm writing, I care about it very much. It's obviously still a part of me, but I am probably not going to like put as much of my personal stock or like my personal weight into like what people think of like my books or my writing, just because like the industry is so like interesting. Everyone's going to have a different opinion. And I think with your debut, you don't really know how to handle that. You don't really know how to like handle hearing everyone's voices about your work. And people do it in like a bunch of different ways. Like I personally like don't look at review. Like I've had Goodreads blocked for like months and months. Like that's just like how I deal with it. And people do different things. But I think like going on into different projects, I think there's recognizing a separation between writing the thing that you love, and then realizing that it's not like just for you anymore, and that it's like going to be read by a larger audience.
I just want to quickly add one last thing, and that is like whenever you write a story, even if you have to trunk it, like this book was in my trunk for several years. I had already written 2 other books after I wrote the Moonlight Blade, and it was just sitting there. And you know what, I tried one last time because I really believed in the story. And sometimes you get rejected not because a story is bad, but because it's just not the right time or a marketplace for it. So you know what, nothing is ever dead, and your stories, they're always worth writing and hanging on to.
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating when like an author will debut and then sometimes you'll find out that it's not even ever like the first one that they even queried or like the first one, that they're sort of going out into the world for. So that segues nicely into my another question that I had, which was if everyone can just walk us through your journey to publication. So like your process, feel free to answer what I just said. If this was like not the first one that you queried, or feel free to just let us know how your journey to publication has been, or like what it was.
Yeah, for me, I never dreamed I would actually publish this book. I started writing it in a senior writing seminar in college. Jenny Boylan, the author, was my professor. She's amazing. And I remember specifically, she said, the first book that you write is never going to get published. Like, you're going to have to keep writing books because the first one is just how you learn to write a book, right? And I think somewhere like challenge accepted. So this actually was the first book, that only book that I've written, which is true and it isn't, because I, again, have been working on it since 2012 and have rewritten it so many times and changed it so many times. So it's really been probably 12 books, over the course of me working on it. But the first time I had like a full draft that was in somewhat querying form was in 2018. I started querying and wasn't having much luck. I also didn't really know where it fit in the world at the time. Like, was it YA? Was it adult? Was it, contemporary? Is it sci-fi? So like it does blend a little bit between those areas. And so I got some really great agent feedback, which was super helpful. Did a couple of rewrites based on that. Still wasn't having any luck 2 years later. And unfortunately, Pitch Wars is not in existence anymore, but there used to be this mentorship program called Pitch Wars, and I did that. So with the help of two mentors, Kelly Quinlan and Adrienne Tooley, they helped me rewrite it more for YA. Like, I didn't really know how to write a YA book, so they really helped me with that. I got my agent, Erin Harris, through that process. And what was sort of strange and goes along with timing is, like, I was writing this end of the world book. It just really wasn't resonating. I signed with her March 2020. COVID hit. All of a sudden, we're kind of living through this version of an apocalypse, at least, maybe the biggest extent that any of us have ever felt, maybe not. And, very selfishly, I'm having two thoughts of like, oh, wow, this might resonate, but also it might be too much. Like, I don't know if this is not going to be escapism anymore. Like, this is not going to be something that people are unfamiliar with. I'm not sure that this book is ever going to sell now, because it's maybe just like too hard for people in this moment. But a year later, we revised it for a full year together. We went on submission after that, and so by the time it sold in November of, I guess, 2021, what is time? People were saying, like, I think the world is ready for this now. I think it's a good way to explore like the feelings of COVID. It's not a COVID book, it's not mentioned, but like the asteroid sort of is this like alternative parallel world of like everybody going through this big global event at the same time. So it went from wasn't resonating to perhaps it's resonating too much to actually maybe this is a good time for it, and might help teens who are struggling with depression kind of grapple with those things in a world that's a little bit different from ours.
So, Waking Fire is the first book idea I had, but it's not the first book that I wrote. I wrote a different book, totally different story. And then I came back to Waking Fire and I wrote about 3 or 4 different versions of it, where sometimes it takes place, it doesn't even, her village isn't even part of the story at all. And other ones, it takes place in like a pseudo European type world where there's, castles and knights in armor and that kind of stuff, which is nothing like the book now. So I don't even, they're so different. It's hard to, but the core of the story was the same. There was always this young girl who was, wanting to save and protect her family. Like, that was always in the story. Um, so I've written the book maybe about 4 or 5 times, and so the published version is probably like, I think, like the 4th or the 5th version of it. Um, And my journey to being published is a little bit different than most people because I got my book deal before I got my agent. Um, and it was the publisher, who is Inkyard Press. They put out a call for submissions for unagented Black authors, and so I sent my book, which was, I guess, like the fourth version of the book, to them. And about 6 months later, they said, "We like your book. We want to buy it. Now you need to go get an agent." And I said, "Okay." And once I had that in my back pocket, it was much easier to get an agent's attention. Before I was sending out queries, I was about ready to give up until that happened, because I've been sending out queries and I would get requests for fulls or requests to read more, but I never got any offers. But once I told people I have a book deal, I just need an agent to help me navigate it, then I started to get so offers and from a few different agents. But so my process, my journey was a little bit backwards compared to most people's, but it all worked out, and so I'm here now, and I'm working on book 2 in the series.
Yeah, I think I had not a roundabout journey, but I always, been telling myself stories, reading a lot, just narrative. Everything I did was like based on a screen and like involving a narrative in some way. But I wasn't consciously trying to write in the aim of like getting an agent or getting published until after college. And even then, I would just like write unfinished 200,000 word manuscripts that in no world are publishable. But I think it was Tessa who was saying like it's not wasted time. So I was having fun kind of putting that work in, like kind of honing my skills, figuring out what my interests are. And then when I started Midnight Strikes, it was the fall of 2018. So that took about a year to draft and then another year and a half to edit. I went through several times and several drafts, including like a terrible like 4 month period where I was just rewriting the first chapter over and over again. A little time loop of my own, I guess. And then by I guess it was summer 2021, vaccines were out, people were excited. Publishing and querying seemed to be very slow, so I sent out my first kind of very cautious queries and didn't expect it to move fast at all. Then 6 weeks later, I was at a family member's wedding and getting ready for that, where I got a full request, and I was very excited, but I could not respond until the next day because there were more wedding events. And then by the Monday after the wedding, um, I woke up in the middle. It was very early morning. I was on the West Coast. I was very tired, very exhausted after this wedding, but I saw an email asking to talk from that agent, and I was very excited, very just like dazed. And call went well, and then I signed with my agent Claire a couple of weeks later. So that was great. And then when I sat down with her in August to talk about like what revisions she wanted or what the plan was, she was just like, "Well, I think you've done enough. An editor can look at this and kind of see where they want to make a mark. So no edits. We'll just go straight to sub." And I was like, "Are you sure? Really? That can't possibly be right." But I trusted her, and lo and behold, we went out on sub later that month, and I sold in a preempt, which was very exciting.
Made of Stars was not the first book that I wrote or queried. I actually wrote it in the summer of 2019 while I was querying that first book and not having like any success at all, which like now obviously that book was not good, but like at the time it was the best thing I'd ever written. And it was also the only thing that I had ever written. Like I have so much respect for writers who can like write and pursue publishing seriously in college. Like that was not me. Like I worked on that one first book for like 4 years. And by the time I was querying it and not getting any responses, I was like, all my ideas are gone. Like, this is it. I'm at the end of my road. So like, honestly, for Made of Stars, I was just like, what do I want to read about? So I just started like writing what I would want to read. And pretty quickly, like through writing it, I drafted it really quickly. And then pretty soon I realized that like it was better than the book that I was currently querying. And I had a really good feeling about it. So I started querying end of 2019 into early 2020. And it was just like a solid 6 months of like straight form rejections. Like nobody wanted this book. I went through like my entire agent list. And then as like a last resort, I entered this mentorship program that also really isn't around anymore, Author Mentor Match. And you get paired with a agented or published writer to kind of help you revise your manuscript. And that was honestly like, I think mentorship programs can be like pretty hit or miss depending on like what your experience is, but that was the best thing that could have happened for me at the time, because not only did I get to like revise with somebody, but it was also the first time that anyone had ever like said yes to my book, and also just like been excited about the characters and been excited about the plot, and like genuinely thought that it could like do something. Cause like until then I'd had like a straight 6 months of like agent form rejection. So like I was ready to give up on that one. But I got into this mentorship program like second week of March 2020, which, you know, fun week for the entire world at that point. So I was then like locked inside for several months, like got laid off from my job. My classes went online, and I was just like alone in my house with nothing to do but like revise this book. So like that was like my several months of like early quarantine when my memories are just like working on this book, which I then queried again in the summer of 2020, I guess at that point. And then I was like not super optimistic because I hadn't had a great experience last time. And I had queried my entire agent list at that point. And a lot of agencies have this thing where they're like, you can't submit your book unless it's been 6 months or like, unless it's been significantly revised. And like my book had, but like the query letter was the same. And then the first few chapters were the same. So I was like, these people are just reading the same thing that they have already rejected. I don't know what to do. But I just like submitted it and kind of changed the title a little bit and just like hoped that no one was going to remember the fact that they had rejected the book like 3 months ago. And it worked. So I got an agent offer, and like during that time we did a round of revisions together for a few months, and then we went out on sub with it and it sold.
So this wasn't the first book I wrote. It's actually the 5th, but only the second one I ever queried. And I started writing it back in 2016. So in 2017, I started querying it. I queried it to almost everybody I could think of. And I got so many requests for fulls, but one by one, they kept coming back with feedback like, we don't know how to sell this, like, or it's good, but you know what, we don't know where this fits in the marketplace. And in the end, I had one offer from a newbie agent, and I thought, you know what, let's just see what happens. And so he went out on sub with this book for about a year, and it pretty much died on sub. And then my personal life wasn't doing so great, so I thought I need to take a break from the industry, just, you know, clear my head and like maybe start fresh. And my agent left agenting, and so there I was all over at the beginning again. But even though I just couldn't stop writing. So I wrote 2 more books, started querying one of those books. And then the movie Raya and the Last Dragon came out. And then I started seeing some agents and editors requesting like, does anybody have a book, something like this? And so I thought, you know what, I have a book sort of in this sort of same vibe. And it's just sitting in my trunk. Why don't I just try submitting it? And I submitted it directly to Entangled. And 3 months later, I had a book deal and a new agent who was amazing. And so, yeah, it's been 7 years since I started writing this book, and it's finally coming out.
Okay, I want to end this by asking one like fun question. I feel like all of these were pretty fun questions personally to listen to, but this is like a less big question, I guess. I love world building so much, and like worlds and twists and everything like that. And so I want to know, what is a small detail which is one of your favorite parts of the world you created, or like, you know, the setting, anything really. But one small detail.
Yeah, I guess like you said, it's my world's a little more grounded in ours, but maybe took a little bit of liberty. My characters still love Bend It Like Beckham. I hope that's still true of some young people because it's an amazing movie, but I love that they still love that movie too.
For me, it was the food. I because my book is set in like a desert type region. I looked up what kinds of foods people in those cultures eat and what can grow out there, what is possible. Um, and then I just made up some recipes of my own that I was like, this sounds really good. I need somebody to learn how to cook this because I want to try it. So um, there's a few scenes. There's like 2 or 3 scenes where like I describe the food that's on the table, and as I was writing it, I was like, oh my gosh, this sounds so good. Somebody needs to make this one day, but I'm not that great of a cook, so I haven't tried.
I think world building is an interesting thing for this book because it takes place in pretty much one city and pretty much one building. But I think one thing that I enjoyed a lot, but unfortunately did not make it to the page, is that Anais has a pet goat back home that she misses very much. Um, so that is something that like I personally like, and I wish I'd made it to the page.
I love that. I feel like I also had like a pet robot that didn't make it on the page too. So RIP to our animals. I feel like I think that like space is interesting because you can obviously do a bunch of stuff, but I liked that one of my main characters, she just like really wants to be an actress. So there's like a few mentions of like theater schools and like the film scenes on their planet. And like obviously that's not really a part of the plot, but I think it's really interesting to think about like space Hollywood and like the movies that they would make on these planets.
I actually put in a whole bunch of like inside jokes and Easter eggs into my book, and I sort of listed them on my website, so you can look that up. But a bunch of the names are pretty much spoilers. Like Nara's name in particular, it's a kind of tree that has yellow flowers, and that sort of hints at what happens at the end of the book. So keep your eyes peeled if you ever read my book. There's a bunch of jokes in there, and maybe I'm the only one that finds them funny.
I'm I'm still reeling from all of these details and all of these answers to the questions. Thank you so much to everyone for joining, to everyone who's watching, to the chat, to these fabulous authors who have just chatted and shared so much time with us. I've put everyone's bookshop.org links in the description box, so definitely go pre-order and order all of everyone's books here. I can definitely recommend them all. And I hope everyone has a really great rest of your day and like reading time, basically.
Thank you so much. This is so fun. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.